Live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Sonali Basak.
And from our studios in Washington, D.C., I'm Kailey Leinz. Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto, a look at the people, transactions, and technology shaping the world of decentralized finance. And over the past 24 hours, the headlines have been fast and furious. Now, Binance and founder CZ heading to a settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice that would reportedly see him step down and plead guilty. Plus, the company would pay a more than $4 billion fine.
Plus, the SEC accuses Kraken of securities laws violations, claiming that the crypto exchange commingled customer assets with its own. Kraken aims to vigorously defend the claims.
And it is a perfect time to talk to SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. In just a few moments, she will join us live to discuss regulation and the agency's recent moves tied to crypto.
Now, Kailey, I want to bring us ahead of the action here. Bitcoin has taken a little bit of a hit in the last 24 hours. When we look at the pressure on the industry, you have the SEC, you have the DOJ really cracking down here. And Bitcoin, for its own part, is down only 0.4%. But if we flip up the board here and we take a look at BNB, this is the native token tied to Binance, as the CEO plans to step down, you're looking at it down about 0.8%. If you look over a 7-day period, though, you are looking at a much bigger decline. It is essentially flat on the 7 days, but we have taken a massive hit over the more medium term here. The news has been dripping out in bits and pieces, that $4 billion fine, as well now as management changes. But remember, as part of the settlement here, you do have Binance as an exchange expected to keep operating.
All right, Sonali, so let's get more on this now, as CZ apparently has just appeared in a courthouse in Seattle, again, reportedly getting ready to plead guilty to criminal charges and step down from the exchange he co-founded, according to the Wall Street Journal. Joining us now with more is Bloomberg's Allison Vershbril, who is here with me in Washington. Allie, it has been quite a 24 hours when it comes to this story. Of course, Bloomberg, you and some of our colleagues here were reporting on this deal and the $4 billion potential fine initially yesterday. What do we know?
So right now, we know a couple things. We know that they are going to face, the company itself will face this $4 billion fine, but it seems like, be able to continue operating, which I think is a huge, win for the industry, because there was real concern that the exchange, which is the largest in the entire world for crypto, would have to shut down. Yeah. And then also, as you mentioned, we see the Wall Street Journal reporting that CZ would step down as CEO, that he plans to plead guilty to criminal charges. I think that is going to be quite a shift. I mean, he's been kind of a fixture in the crypto industry.
Well, what's important, too, to take note of, according to the Journal's reporting, he will keep his stake in Binance as it continues to operate, even as he steps down. What is the future for CZ looking like? We know the sentencing won't be for a while, even if he pleads guilty today.
I think the main thing that we're still trying to figure out right now is he going to face any jail time? Obviously, if he's pleading guilty to criminal charges, we might find out what's going to happen next in sentencing, but that is something that we're trying to track down. Also, are there other executives that could face charges as well? So those are some of the issues that we're still, trying to figure out as all of this develops very, very quickly.
Yeah, and of course, we're talking criminal charges with the Department of Justice here, but of course, Binance as an entity, as an exchange, also faces civil charges with the SEC, as do other exchanges as well, including Coinbase, of course, already. And then yesterday, the news was the SEC suing Kraken, again with this accusation that it was operating illegally as securities exchange. Tell us more about that.
Right. So I think interesting when you're talking about Binance, though, the SEC is not currently listed on the DOJ announcement for the presser at 3 p.m. So it's unclear if they're going to be part of this kind of massive settlement. But we are seeing the SEC continuing this really aggressive push against crypto firms, saying that they're operating illegally. Some people, I think, thought that once we saw the Coinbase case and Binance, that we wouldn't necessarily see any other large cases. But obviously, that's not the case. We see Kraken yesterday. So
they come for Kraken, too. All right, Allie Vershbril, thank you so much. No, it's been a very busy couple of days for you. We really appreciate the coverage. And joining us now, I'm glad to say, to continue this conversation is an SEC commissioner. Commissioner Hester Peirce is joining us now. Thank you very much for your time, Commissioner. It's very good to see you again, and what a day to have you. I know there will be a lot that you cannot say, but when we look at this apparent deal that has been brokered, not just with the DOJ, but also the CFTC, what ultimately could this mean for the SEC's case against Binance?
Well, Kailey, it's great to be here. And as you guessed, I can't talk about ongoing cases But I will say that with all of these cases that move forward, we should really be thinking proactively about building a regulatory framework that would work and allow companies to do business in the United States. And that's what I'm hoping we can work on in the coming months and years.
Okay, so I know you can't speak about this specific case. I just wonder conceptually if you see a world in which someone pleading guilty and potentially stepping down from operation of an exchange could be something of a remedy to also settle civil charges, or are those issues just too separate?
Again, it's difficult for me. The facts and circumstances of each case are different. It is common for people to deal with the criminal piece first, and then deal with the civil piece. But again, it depends on each case and the facts and circumstances.
I understand you can't speak to the specifics of the Binance case, but to the extent that you can glean, what it means for an industry for such a big figure to be pleading guilty to criminal charges, how does this either set crypto back or help it turn the page? How do you view this?
Again, I can't comment on the specific news that you all just covered, but I can say that what we really need to be doing is to be working proactively to figure out a regulatory framework. And I think then we would see some of the issues that we've seen in the industry not happening. If you try to shut the industry out from access to all of the traditional financial rails, then you actually end up with a situation in which everyone is worse off. So I hope that we can work on really doing something that's more productive.
Hester, can you bring us inside the dynamic here of the SEC? It's pretty well known that you've really been an advocate of the industry in many ways. The SEC has clearly clamped down left and right when you think about how they have approached exchanges in particular, let alone the listing of digital assets. What is the dynamic? What does the dispute look like inside the agency?
Well, Sonali, I would take issue with the characterization that I'm an advocate for the industry. What I'm an advocate for is people being able to come into the SEC and figure out what regulations apply and then comply with those regulations. That's where I think we've fallen down on the job. And I think that's where the conflict has sometimes arisen between me and my colleagues. I think we need to do a better job of providing some guidelines to people. But we all get along very well, and so these are constant conversations that we're having, and I hope that we can get to a more, as I said, a more productive place. But it is quite frustrating to a lot of people in the industry, and I share their frustration that it's one thing to say that there's been a violation. It's a whole other issue to say, okay, now here's the framework that you can comply with realistically, and you can then avoid future violations.
Well, Commissioner, when we're talking about conversations that you are having internally at the SEC, whether it is commissioner to commissioner or chair, commissioner to staff, we have heard a lot of reporting in another matter that has gotten a lot of attention regarding a spot ETF, that there is ongoing conversations between issuers who have filed some of these applications and individuals at the SEC. And I wonder if you can shed any light on how much you as a commissioner might be involved in that, or really if this is just happening at the lower staff level at the moment.
No, again, I really can't comment on that, but I think I've been very transparent that I've thought for many years now that there is no reason for us to stand in the way of a spot Bitcoin exchange traded product. Every one, of course, must be judged on its own unique set of facts and circumstances, but we've had a number come before us where I've said, I don't see the reason that we're denying these. And so I think we got a little bit of a nudge from the court, and we'll see where things go from here.
And that nudge from the court, I'm guessing you're alluding to the Grayscale case in which they found that the SEC was arbitrary and capricious in denying Grayscale's attempts to convert GBTC into an ETF. There has been a lot of questions, Commissioner, about where exactly Grayscale is going to fall in terms of the timeline here. Do you think that would be resolved theoretically before actually one of these other spot filings are approved, or could all of this happen simultaneously?
I can't speak to that. All of those are under consideration now, so I can't speak to them.
I'm curious about the path forward, Commissioner, because if we look at the way that the industry has been fighting back against a lot of the cases that the SEC has brought forward, do you think that the agency will continue to have a particularly aggressive posture moving forward with more suits, or do you think that kind of losing some of these cases will take some of the steam off the industry?
Well, I will say that litigation is not the most effective way to carry out regulation. So certainly enforcement actions are one tool that we have in our toolbox, but we have other tools. And so I think that we should start really thinking about using some of those other tools. Now, I haven't noticed a slowdown necessarily in the cases that we've announced. You see cases being announced. So I think we're still on an enforcement track, but I'm still trying to urge us to try to take a more productive approach.
When does that happen? Do you think that it would only come under a change in regime, or do you think that this could happen under the Gensler administration?
Well, I think one thing that could really change things is Congress. Of course, Congress has been quite interested in these topics, and so Congress weighing in would certainly affect the way we move forward. But realistically, I mean, any of us could get up tomorrow and say we're going to try to take a different approach. We need to have three of us agreeing on that. But if we did, I think we could turn things around more quickly.
Do you get a sense, Commissioner, that there is a third that may be willing to join you? Is there a real shift in the mood music at the SEC, if you will?
Again, it's hard for me to see that from what we've been doing publicly, but I'm always hopeful.
Well, fair enough. Hope is a certain kind of strategy. You mentioned that Congress doing something would be quite helpful here. Of course, we have seen some moves in that regard. The Financial Services Committee in the House did pass some market structure legislation this summer that has yet to proceed forward. I wonder what your thought is on that kind of legislation, the delineation it makes between the authorities of your agency, the SEC, and the CFTC, or whether there should be changes to that.
Look, I think Congress is the right body to be making these kinds of decisions. It's ultimately they who are directly accountable to the American people, and so they're the right ones to decide. I think that there are ways that we could work together with the CFTC. We do it all the time in other areas, and I think we can do it in this area as well. But ultimately, it's up to Congress to decide which pieces need to go where. And doing that is not easy, because crypto is not just financial. It could have a lot of implications for different areas of our lives as well. And so they're undertaking a big job in trying to draft this legislation.
Commissioner, how does the crypto community think about the SEC's agenda ahead? On one hand, there are these enforcement actions. On the other hand, you do have a very busy agenda outside of the crypto industry as well. There are these ETFs in the pipeline. What can investors expect moving forward in terms of the order of priorities?
Well, I think you're correct in pointing to the rest of the agenda as being really important here. The commission is really the busiest that it's been in my memory. We're working on many rules, most of which have nothing to do with crypto, and we also have a very busy enforcement calendar. And so I think that given all of the priorities that we have, I think that means that crypto doesn't necessarily get a slot on the rulemaking agenda as we've seen, and where it does, frankly, it doesn't look great. Some of the initial steps that we've taken with respect to regulating crypto have said either you have to centralize, you have to get out of the U.S., or you have to shut down. Those are not great options, and they totally undermine the whole point of crypto, which is to facilitate decentralization, which then can make for a more robust financial system, and other parts of the economy as well can be decentralized. And that's the strength and the transparency that comes with not relying on centralized entities, and the equal terms of access that apply to everyone. These are really valuable things. And if you force centralization, there are some points where there will be centralization, of course, but just forcing that is not, it's missing out on the point.
SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, we thank you so much for your time on a very, very, very busy day. And as we decipher all of these headlines over the past day and the fallout to the crypto industry, joining us now is Seth. He's the head of liquid investments at Coinfund. You look at the price movement just on the back here, Seth, of BNB, for example, and even Bitcoin, which has been facing some weakness in the last couple of days. If you're an investor, where do you go?
Well, I mean, Bitcoin's had a really big move up until the last couple of days, so we're just seeing a little bit of a consolidation here. I think one of the things that the market was really looking for was a settlement with Binance that allowed for CZ to stay in his executive role. If we now try to play forward what happens with Binance without CZ in his leadership role, there's just a little greater of a cone of uncertainty. And I think that's what the market is trying to wrestle with here. But again, I don't think that the move that we've seen in Bitcoin is particularly material off of this news so far. And we'll have the press conference at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, and we'll be monitoring that, of course, have full coverage of it for you here on Bloomberg TV. But Seth, when we think about the levels from which Bitcoin may be just slightly retrieving from, a lot of the move to the upside we have seen has been driven by all of this optimism around a spot ETF getting approved. I'm not sure we got any real closer to understanding what the timeline is on that one from SEC Commissioner Peirce, though we did try very hard. Seth, but given the run-up we have seen and how much it seems like the market views this now as a when, not an if, how much more upside is realistically left if it happens?
Well, I mean, so we're working with a view that the likely date for an approval is sometime between now and January 10th, which is the ARK Invest ETF deadline. And then the question comes down to it, and we're also of the view that it's a high likelihood approval. There could be a delta between approval and launch. And then the question comes down to what are flows likely to look like? And there are a lot of moving parts there. GBTC, assuming that you had asked the question about whether everything is likely to be approved at once, assuming that everything gets approved at once, GBTC could see some outflows if it keeps its fees at 200 basis points. The general sense, though, is we're going to see the financial advisor community really embrace this product. There are also a bunch of players in traditional finance that are excited about having an equity instrument that tracks Bitcoin right at the NAV without any deviation from the net asset value that they can put through traditional equity pipes. So I think there's going to be a broad set of interest. We're working with a rough base case of hundreds of millions of inflows over the first few days, $1 billion in the first week. And then I think you can get quite a bit larger fairly quickly. And obviously, all of this is pro-cyclical. So as the price of Bitcoin moves up and we're trading just off of year-to-date highs, that increases the likely inflows upon approval.
Seth, I'm really curious about the market structure that is involved in crypto moving forward. If you have the SEC cracking down on the major exchanges, if you have Binance facing this massive settlement, what happens? Do people move more into DeFi and into products that you would buy on a normal exchange like a NASDAQ or whatnot with an ETF? What happens to the exchanges?
I think it's a little bit of all the above. So to your exchange question, Coinbase, we think, is very well positioned, but that is predominantly the onshore U.S. market right now. They've made some really good pushes abroad. So we'll likely see more engagement on spot at Coinbase abroad, and then they've launched their perpetuals exchange, very popular product, perpetual futures in crypto. We'll likely see some really good traction there as well. I also think if you look at the Binance settlement and you compare it to what happened with BitMEX back in the last cycle, without CZ at the helm, I think there's a real question of what level of volumes Binance is going to be able to retain. And I think you're going to see a lot of upstart exchanges try to attack that volume very quickly. So you'll have exchanges, and by the way, exchanges that are likely to be hyper compliant given the current environment. So this will bring in the next iteration of exchanges that are very cognizant of the global regulatory environment, then that's going to be a positive. Then I think you'll see a lot of flows into ETFs, as we were just talking about. So getting flows on Bitcoin initially, and then probably an ETH spot ETF down the road. So that brings flows into the traditional equities world in a more material way. And then I think DeFi is a big beneficiary. That for Coinfund, seeing the build out of DeFi is really important to us. The decentralization of a lot of core parts of the technology world and the financial world is right at our core ethos. So we're really excited to see DeFi pick up a lot of the volumes that have been at non-compliant offshore exchanges.
All right, Seth, great day to have you. A lot certainly going on in this space. Coinfund, Seth Gins, we appreciate it. And of course, we'll have more on the Binance and CZ story next. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Crypto. I'm Sonali Basak in New York with Kailey, Leinz in Washington. And back to the news of the day, Binance founder Changpeng Zhao agreed to step down and plead guilty to violating criminal U.S. anti-money laundering charges, according to the Wall Street Journal. And for more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Hannah Miller. When you look at this guilty plea coming from the head of the world's largest crypto exchange, weeks after the Sam Bankman-Fried trial ended, how much of a cloud is there over the industry still?
It's yet another stunning blow to the crypto industry. CZ is the biggest name in crypto right now. Binance is the largest crypto exchange by trading volume in the world. So this is a major hit for an industry that's just been beset by scandals and scams.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is another prominent figure. And we've seen what's happened to other prominent figures in crypto in the past. When you actually look at the court document, the different counts that are being charged here, in addition to money laundering, there's sanctions violations of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. All of this, of course, being criminal charges. But there remains a huge open question, Hannah, about what happens in the civil case like the one brought with the SEC. I get the sense that this is not actually over.
This is not over, not by any means. Yes, we still have that SEC's lawsuit. There are still actions against competitors to Binance, like Coinbase. There's a lot to shake out here. And it's not over yet for Binance. It's not over for CZ. There are many questions about whether he will be able to maintain majority ownership of Binance and whether the exchange will be able to continue to operate normally.
Our thanks to Bloomberg's Hannah Miller. Kailey, when we think about what's up ahead of us, you have Changpeng Zhao, who had already pled guilty, had arrived in court. There's also a DOJ announcement later today with U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland holding a press conference at 3 p.m. to announce separate but related crypto enforcement actions. And Bloomberg is learning that the announcement will involve that Binance settlement.
Yeah, and there could be some announcements regarding Tether as well. But again, Sonali, and as we were just discussing with Hannah, you've got the DOJ here. You've got the CFTC also apparently involved in this deal. The Securities and Exchange Commission very notably is not. And while Commissioner Hester Peirce, who joined us earlier in this show, did say, there's a lot she cannot comment on when we talked about what ultimately this could mean for the SEC in relation to its case. If you have CZ stepping down, if you have some kind of resolution, at least to the criminal charges, I wonder what ultimately it does mean for the charges that the SEC has brought, given that they've brought similar charges against other exchanges as well. Of course, Coinbase previously and Kraken just within the last 24 hours.
Yeah, this story is so not over. And we have to remember, even Commissioner Peirce had told us that if you are in the crypto industry, you have to remember the SEC has a very large agenda, and crypto is not at the top of that list, even with all these enforcement actions coming down so fast and hard.
Yeah, it's very true. It just seems like these are the ones that get a lot of oxygen. And certainly we talk a lot about them on this show, and we'll continue to have coverage of this in the weeks ahead. So make sure to come back and join us next week. Of course, we'll be speaking with Danelle Dixon. She is the CEO and Executive Director of the Stellar Development Foundation. We'll get her thoughts on what these cases mean for the industry, just what the regulatory picture looks like going forward. So we'll have more on that from here in Washington. Of course, Sonali Basak along for the ride in New York with us today. Make sure to come back next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Bloomberg.